Let's see.
Hello.
Hey, what's up, Henry? How's it going?
Pretty good. How are you, Mike, or shall I say Gina? You
Yeah,
prefer?
Gina's my fiance. Yeah, she's got the paid Zoom account, so I'm using
Yeah.
hers.
Oh, so, yeah, we got to pull out all the stops.
Yeah, no, it's good to meet you. It's
You
awesome to meet
too.
you. I'm excited to talk to you.
Likewise. See a cat
Cool.
roaming around in the background.
Yeah, that's my dog. Come here,
Oh,
Jesse.
dog.
Yeah, come on. Yeah, she was search dog for a little while for the fire department. She retired
Oh,
early, and now she just roams around here looking for things.
yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Once you're trained, I guess you always got to apply that skill set somewhere.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Boy, you want to jump into it? I got a
Yeah.
bunch of
I'm
questions for
I'm
you.
ready when
Yeah.
you are.
Yeah. Do you want to just tell me about yourself real quick first and what Tricycle Day is, how you got where you are,
Sure. Yeah, we
and
can
what
start
led you to
there.
all this?
So what led me to all of this was I moved through the yoga path. Today, the predominant narrative around psychedelics and why so many people are interested in them is largely around the mental health application. But for me, that was not the path in, at least not explicitly, not to my knowledge, that wasn't the path.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really, what I was looking for was a deeper understanding of the self. So I had been a devoted yoga practitioner for something like 10 years at the time, was a full-time yoga teacher as well. And at that point, I was very invested in the philosophy beyond the physical practice. So in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, they talk about a process that leads to the ultimate destination of yoga. And the ultimate destination of yoga, according to Patanjali, is a non-dual state, which is sometimes called yoga. It's also sometimes called samadhi. And that was a really interesting idea to me. I was satisfied with just wrestling with it intellectually for a long time, because I figured that in order to experience that, you needed to be, a renunciate and disappear into the caves and
Mm,
fast in the darkness
mhm.
for years upon years. And that was not my life. I was a householder. I was living in New York City, and I just figured, okay, that's a time that's an experience that I will not get to have in this lifetime. And then one of my yoga teacher friends who, was equally interested and geeked out about all of the philosophy came to me and told me about an experience that she had that she likened to, a shortcut to samadhi. And what she was talking about was a ceremony with Bufo alvarius, so
Mm.
5-MeO-DMT. Um, and I didn't know really much about psychedelics at all. I had the layperson's kind of understanding of mushrooms and how they're represented in pop culture, but definitely didn't know about all these other medicines. Didn't had never heard of Bufo. Um, but this framing was something that was really compelling to me. And the first time that I really was motivated to try psychedelics was because
Mm.
of the way she presented it to me. So within a week, I was walking in the door of the same, Upper East Side Manhattan doorman building that she had her Bufo ceremony in for my own.
Cool.
And so I had that experience. It blew the doors of reality open for me in ways that we can certainly talk about if that's where you want to take this interview.
Yeah.
But suffice to say, for now, I mean, it irreversibly changed how I look at myself, how I look at reality, and my yoga practice, and all of these things. So that kicked off my interest in psychedelics. It wasn't for several more years that I decided to do something professionally with it. January 2023 is when I launched Tricycle Day. And I did that because in that time in between my first psychedelic experience and launching Tricycle Day, a lot had happened. A lot had happened in the policy side, a lot had happened
Mm.
culturally, with Michael Pollan's book. And a lot of research was coming out suddenly because that was becoming easier to do and more uh, socially acceptable in academic circles to engage in that research. And tracking it became sort of a pet project of mine. But I figured if I'm interested in all of this, certainly other people are. Let's put this into a publication. I'd seen other newsletter businesses kind of take off in other verticals, and I thought that's a model I could do. I'm good at writing, and I have a unique voice that I can bring to this. So let's see how it goes.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm surprised 2023. I think I must have started following you pretty much at the beginning then.
Yeah.
on newsletter because it's divided into like policy and science and a couple different sections. So it's
Yeah.
like a one-stop shop for all things that are happening in psychedelics.
Hmm.
Um, it might have even been actually where I heard about CIIS and the psychedelic studies bachelor program,
Yeah.
which is what I'm doing right now, which is
Yeah.
this class is psychedelic advocacy.
Nice.
Um, and that's kind of like the core of what like brought me interested in going down that education path is being able to talk to people about psychedelics to
Hmm.
advocate and share kind of this new science that's coming up and the different applications of psychedelics and things like that without just sounding like a hippie talking about psychedelics, you know,
Yeah.
especially in my profession, fire department, we have to be like careful about what we say and everything like that. So I was like,
Sure.
oh, an educational path would be good. So, um, my question about the story that you were telling me before is your yoga teacher friend that introduced you to Bufo,
Mhm.
and you didn't know about Bufo before that. Do you remember what she said or how that conversation went
Mhm.
that sparked your interest or what it was for you that started that kind of paradigm shifting moment?
Yeah. Well, also just kind of put you in my shoes for a minute. I mean, at this point, I was pretty open to the idea of altered states of consciousness. I had accessed them through endogenous means in a lot of different
Hmm.
ways through my yoga practice and various forms of yoga and breath work. So um, that made it a little bit more palatable to hear, oh yeah, I smoked the venom of the Sonoran
Uh-huh.
Desert Toad and dissolved the illusion of a separation between self and other. I think, to your point around how we advocate to deliver the message to the appropriate audience, like that pitch would not go over well, probably with a fire department, but because she knew
Right.
me and
Yeah.
we had this shared experience around a deep spiritual community, it made sense for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think to really get to the core of it, what was appealing to me was framing it around something that I was already working toward and had been invested in for a long time, which is, connecting with the true nature of the self.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Like connecting it with like a path that somebody's already interested in. And for you,
Hmm.
that was samadhi and like this state of like, would you say samadhi is like the state of like no self merging with
It's
is that
similar to
what
the state of no self described in Buddhism. In yoga philosophy, I don't know if that exact phrasing of emptiness or no self ever comes
uh-huh.
up, but they do describe a non-dual state. So, like in yoga, the philosophy says that everything that we experience in this 3D reality is called Maya, and it's a dream, it's an illusion, and
Hmm.
it's real in the sense that we are experiencing it, but it's not the true reality that is
Right.
underneath it all. And the true reality is oneness. It's that unity consciousness.
Oh my God, we could go down a whole spiritual rabbit hole right now.
Yeah.
That I think would be amazing. Yeah, that's awesome because I what you're saying resonates with me. Um, the spiritual path kind of like started for me before psychedelics as well. Um, so it was kind of I'm connecting it now like a connection that definitely did make it more palatable.
Hmm.
But say like you and I were sitting down at a fire station kitchen table. Um, what are some like tips for talking about this would come to mind for you for an audience like that? And
Yeah.
so far, what I've found is because I've been using kind of my education as a gateway to that conversation. People say, "Oh, what are you working on right now?" "Oh, I'm studying psychedelics at CIIS," and I say, "Oh, that's really cool." And I've found that um, they're way more open-minded than I thought,
Hmm.
but they're not talking about it because they're afraid of the repercussions and everything. We have the legal landscape that is pretty complicated right
Yeah.
now. But for you or for like one of my peers that maybe doesn't have that education gateway to the conversation, like how would you start to bring this into a conversation more for firefighters or a population that could benefit from this,
Yeah.
but might not necessarily be. like super knowledgeable about it right off the bat. I mean, we have Joe Rogan talking about it, Oprah Winfrey, and all of these
Hmm.
types of people, which I think is really opened the door. But
Yeah.
do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the most effective thing, and there's a lot of people who are working on this problem, right? Because you could argue that policy reform is downstream of cultural shifts, right? So you have to get the
Hmm.
people to want it to happen, and then we can have the regulations change. So um, the people who are experts in this, I've spoken to many of them, and what they say is, yes, like having empirical data is really useful. The like real world data, clinical trial data, all of that stuff is helpful, and being able to break down the science for people who are more attracted to that kind of explanation, all of that's useful. But the number one most important thing is for people to hear personal testimony, to hear stories from people who experience the world similarly to them.
Hmm.
So, you've probably noticed that the veteran community has been very centered in like the policy reform narrative over the past several years because of
Yeah, they've been
PTSD.
very, very well organized.
They've been super well organized, and I think, it makes sense to put them at the center of it because there's a real need. There's a ton of suicide, which is,
Hmm.
a huge tragedy. And there's a certain amount of like irony in the fact that we send these people off to like defend our country and then we can't give them the
Hmm.
support when they come back. And the third part of it is that, there's like sort of a bipartisan bridge there. Because historically, drug policy reform is like a left coded
Hmm.
thing, and now it's been proven out to be bipartisan with Republican-led efforts all over the country. Um, so, what has been effective there is getting veterans to go up and give testimony and talk about their experience. Because it's one thing to hear about, the power of these medicines from someone who it has the stereotype, right? Maybe it's hippie, maybe it's,
Hmm.
tech bro from Silicon Valley. But if you don't resonate with that person, it's easier to cast that experience off as irrelevant to me. But if somebody comes in who is a firefighter or even is a first responder in a sort of tangential, like related adjacent field, like that carries a lot more weight. So that's what I would try to do. But then with failing that, it's like, yeah, come back to the objective facts. And there's so much research now to show a compelling effect that it's like pretty hard to ignore for anybody who is motivated by empirical evidence.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense too. I think one of the things that I've found too is that like the senior members on the fire department, the guys that are about to retire, are more open to this. I thought they'd be the ones that were they grew up in the 80s, maybe 70s, 80s. It was definitely post 60s,
Yeah.
but they grew up in this really really heavy drug criminalization era.
Hmm.
But I'm finding that maybe it's because they've had a 20, 30-year career of trauma and things like that, or maybe it's because they're getting close to retiring and they don't care as much about the consequences. But
Yeah.
that's something that's surprised me. Um, and I wanted to ask if you've had like similar experiences or talking to people. You've talked to a ton of people over the last 3.5 years that you've been doing this. Is there any types of people that you've talked to that have surprised you that have been into this or had opinions that have surprised you?
What's been surprising to me is like my own first party data on this, like
Hmm.
who is reading Tricycle Day and who's responding and who's, engaging with Tricycle Day's connection to Althea and going and booking experiences in the regulated markets of Oregon and Colorado. And
Hmm.
it is like I'm used to it now, but at first I was very surprised by the age. Similar to what you're saying, it's more the older crowd. And I actually just featured an interview with someone who's writing a book on this topic on psychedelics and the
Interesting.
counterculture of aging. And she's talking about how um, boomers and Gen X, like this kind of like 50s, 60s and above, this group is like the prime age to be engaging with psychedelics, partly because I think you get to the point at that part of your life where you kind of don't care so much about the rules that have been prescribed to you.
Hmm.
And psychedelics fit very much with that kind of breaking the rules, breaking your own frameworks kind of
Yeah.
attitude. And it's also, they've had the life experience to be able to reflect and they have the maturity to engage with these topics. And many people have been through many rounds of therapy and have done a lot of internal work. And that's another thing that, we've seen over and over again with like the licensed psilocybin facilitator network that we work with is
Mhm.
people who have already come having done a lot of work tend to have more profound experiences because they're primed and they are less resistant to, difficult material. They're
Right.
more ready to turn toward the experience.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the things that I like about this field of mental health care. People want to change in this field. The people that I've talked to, they're ready to make a change. They're ready to look into their own patterns and their own, I don't want to sound like their own darkness, or like they're people that actually like have done a lot of the work that you're talking about. So
Mm,
it's the stories that I hear from people are really a lot of the stories that are like inspiring and meaningful.
mhm.
So I think that's why it's another thing about psychedelics is you can't really push it on anyone because it's such a
Yeah.
profound experience. And
Yeah.
when you're um, recommending or facilitating an experience like that for somebody, the whole describing characteristic of a psychedelic experience is that it's ineffable. So how are
Mhm.
you going to prepare someone for something that by definition you can't prepare them for until they've experienced it?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that brings up another kind of complicated factor in talking to people around the fire station about psychedelics is
Totally.
um, when somebody's mentally struggling and you don't necessarily want to like, oh, have you heard about psilocybin? Have you heard about bufo? Have you like it
Mm.
comes off a little bit I don't know, religious, like
Mm.
or pushy.
Yeah.
But then I also
Yeah.
feel
You
like
don't
in
want to be
some
the
sense,
evangelist.
it's like, well, just also not saying anything. Now we're complicit in the fact that we're letting this person still struggle. So the I want to ask your opinion on that. What I kind of come back to is um, just planting seeds and then seeing what comes up. Like just saying,
Mm.
hey, reach out to me if you need anything. And I think I might know somebody that could have some advice for you, and just kind of leave it at that. And then if
Yeah.
that person calls, then it's like, oh, well, this person is a psilocybin facilitator, and kind of go from there. But I want to hear your thoughts on that because it's very, very passive the way that I personally handle that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first, I just want to agree with you wholeheartedly that this is not something that we should push on anyone, because these are very,
Hmm.
very powerful substances and can be very powerful experiences too. I really believe that the person has to initiate it because the other part of the equation is like, these psychedelics facilitate sometimes people call it the inner healing intelligence, right?
Hmm.
So if you're not fully on board with it, then you're going to have this internal resistance. And that's how people end up having so-called bad trips. That's how they
Hmm.
have difficult experiences that are not ultimately productive because they didn't sign up for this. Maybe they felt pressured or didn't have full informed consent around what it might be like. So we don't want to do that. But to answer your question around how you actually can appropriately, responsibly intervene with someone who you feel like could benefit, my approach is always just to talk about my experience. And this is not just, I don't limit this to psychedelics either. Like this is
Hmm.
kind of my approach to life. I'm not the expert in your life, and so I don't propose to know the solution to your situation. I don't have all the context, but what I can do is recognize some similarities, perhaps between what you're going through and what I've gone through, and offer what my experience was. And then if they have questions and their curiosity turns on, they'll ask and you can give more information. And sometimes that's not even an explicit conversation, right? Like sometimes the way that plays out is just you are the lighthouse. It is maybe passive is one way to put it, but you're actively living your life and like giving your contribution to the world and showing up in the way that you are. And if that radiates and people see that and they want more of that, they're going to ask you about what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost just like opening a door, like just opening a door a crack. So if somebody wants to go through it, they can. And another thing that I learned studying Andean cosmology for
Mm,
2 years from um, or the Quero lineage. It's Quero lineage. They teach well, a lot of the same things all the Amazonian
yeah,
lineages teach too about just they talk about not being the savior a lot because the savior and wanting to go and repair somebody or help them get better a lot of the time comes from a place of ourselves not feeling validated unless we can do something for somebody else to prove to ourselves that that
yeah.
we're
It's
worthy
my
more.
responsibility to
Yeah,
fix
and
you,
then
and that's what makes me worth living.
yeah, exactly. And
That's
there's
what
an
makes me
energetic
worthy of
component.
love. Yeah.
Yeah. And the energetic component that I've definitely observed when there's less of an attachment to like fixing somebody or being the savior and just wanting to open a door and then it's up to you if you want to go through that door. If not, that's perfectly fine. If you do, that's perfectly fine. Um, that type of energy,
Hmm.
I think changes the way it's received too.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And both approaches, the heavy-handed one and the one that's more open the door, are motivated by the same intention, which is you want to help. But the difference, to kind of bring it back to the Eastern philosophy stuff, is one has that attachment to it. And
mhm.
we don't want attachment. Attachment
Yeah.
is a recipe for suffering.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a big theme on all these different lineages and different spiritual teachings. Um, I was gonna ask also in here, like maybe shifting gears a little bit towards different models of access, because
Hmm.
there's so many different, and I'm still not even fully decided or thought out on what I think would be the best path for the whole movement to go down. There's
Yeah.
decriminalization, there's legalization, there's the heavy like clinicalization
Mm.
side or religious freedoms.
Yeah.
And um, by the way, another thing, just to go back to sharing how I talk about people for whoever's listening to this is um, I remind people also that not every single path into a psychedelic experience is illegal. There's other countries, there's states where it's legal, like the
Yeah.
facilitator network that you work with in Oregon and Colorado. There's Religious Freedom Restoration Act. It's kind of a
Hmm.
gray area, and some states don't have their own RAFRA, but there's still
Hmm.
a
But there are a
federal.
handful of churches that have actually gotten the explicit exemption from DEA through RFRA. So,
Right, there was just one in was it Washington or so I think it was Spokane, Washington, the
yeah, the list is still quite
first one.
short. Yeah,
Yeah, the first one to get that exemption without having to
without taking it to
sue.
court.
Yeah,
Yeah.
without taking it to court. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, I just remind people that there are legal paths. So just because you're telling somebody about a psychedelic experience you have had, it doesn't necessarily implicate that you've done anything illegal at all. If you
Yeah,
want to just leave details out,
totally.
um, you know, obviously there's nobody can say how or where you had that experience. But anyway, that's just something I wanted to put in there. But
Yeah.
yeah, for all these different paths, like the clinical path, legalization or decriminalization, what are your thoughts on the different routes that the movement could go?
Hmm. My thoughts, I mean, I like them all. I want them all to be
Uh-huh.
there. That really is my belief because, my orientation at this point is how do we make psychedelic medicine accessible to the most number of people, the highest number of people who could potentially benefit from it. And when I think through that lens, I know that some people are going to only feel comfortable when it's administered by a doctor.
Hmm.
And I know that some people are explicitly going to avoid it if it's administered by a doctor, right?
Yeah.
So I don't want one of these paths to prevail over the other, and that is a risk that I see because having worked in the pharmaceutical industry in the past, I kind of know some of the playbooks. And the thing that kind of scares me
Mhm.
about where things are headed right now Scare is a strong word. Something that I'm trying to avoid happening is FDA approved psychedelic medicines prevail and special interest lobbying powers like government affairs departments within these pharmaceutical companies go and say, well, there should definitely not be any decriminalization. There should definitely not be any religious use because that would be unsafe. And the only way people should access it is through, our channel. I don't want that to happen. I want these paths to coexist. And to make it feel like a little bit more practical for you, one of the reasons why is let's just look to simplify things. Let's look only at the legal regulated markets in Oregon and Colorado compared to FDA approved medicine.
Hmm.
Right now, you can go and sit in Oregon or Colorado with psilocybin with a licensed facilitator who is credentialed and is beholden to compliance regulations that are set by the state and is very safe. And we actually have a lot of real world data that shows that people get profound outcomes from these experiences. Now, when Compass gets approved, they're first going to be approved only for the indication of treatment resistant depression. So that means it's like a third line therapy. You have to
Hmm.
fail on a couple of antidepressants before you can do it. And so that's a lot of hoops to jump through for something that could be beneficial off the bat. Moreover, that completely excludes anyone who's going for well-being, who is not, formally diagnosed with something, but is trying to up level or looking for like creative benefit or is discovering the true nature of the self, which are all valid and ultimately healing reasons to go into medicine. So that's one reason why I want them to coexist. But one of the great benefits of having it be FDA approved is that's what insurance companies like to see. And, that brings costs down if you are insured. So, it's a complicated thing. And one of the things that does frustrate me sometimes when I see this in the so-called psychedelic community or ecosystem is when people are just so diehard about my way is the right way. I
Hmm.
don't think that's true. I think maybe your way is the right way for you, but not for everyone.
Yeah, that's so funny. I was literally just having that conversation um, with a buddy of mine about pharmawaska versus ayahuasca,
Hmm.
and we've had our experiences with different people that do push their way or um, particularly like go against the pharmawaska thing really hard because it's not the way that they were taught or the way they've experienced it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think there's not an identical path for everybody. And one of the other things about this is there's so many different routes to this, so many different psychedelics or so many different modalities like group or individual, or if it's like a ceremonial type of thing, if it's pharmawaska, ayahuasca, or any of the other medicines.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't know if I want to ask which one do you think's the best or like or how do you decide which one's right for which person?
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe that's what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I do think about that. I think psilocybin is the most popular psychedelic for a reason. It's very accessible, it's easy to grow yourself, and
Mhm.
physiologically, it's very safe. It probably has the most favorable safety profile of all the psychedelics. That being said, it's not the right solution for everyone. Often the comparison or like the choice that's most salient for people is between ketamine and psilocybin because these are the two that you can do legally in most
Mhm.
places, or in the most places.
Yeah.
Um, and the way that I think about that right now is that ketamine is really good for acute, like extreme suicidal ideation. If somebody needs an intervention quickly because they're at risk of taking their own life, I would I would think ketamine would be a better choice than psilocybin. And one of the most prolific and sought after facilitators in Colorado, said this to me in a way that really struck a chord and landed for me. She said, often people go into psilocybin and they have an experience of what consciousness feels like outside of their body and how their consciousness might live on
Mm.
after death, right? And if you are suicidal and you don't want to live anymore, and the only thing that's keeping you from doing that is a fear of the unknown and what comes next, then that could actually exacerbate the issue and give
Mm.
them a reason to take their own life. So I think ketamine's really good in near-term acute suicidal ideation. And then once someone is more stable, in that case, then you could do psilocybin because the effects have been shown to be much more durable. Ketamine, you have to do like repeated dosing of maintenance.
Yeah.
It doesn't last quite as long. And then, there are other medicines obviously to consider. Ibogaine seems to be really powerful for traumatic brain injury, as well as substance use disorders, especially opioid use disorder. There's not a lot of evidence for ibogaine, but what exists is very favorable for that. Um, I'm partial to 5-MeO DMT because it was so profound for me, and I have yet to replicate that experience of instant ego dissolution and absorption into the oneness that is.
Mhm.
So that will forever have a place in my heart. And then we haven't even talked about all of the empathogens, MDMA being the most famous and popular. It's not a true classic psychedelic in the sense that for most people does not produce visual hallucinations or that sort of thing, but it does have similar use cases in a therapeutic setting. Can be used for depression, can be used for PTSD, and part of the reason for that is that it allows the individual to turn off their shame and guilt so they can look at themselves objectively. So yeah, kind of a rambling answer, but there's a lot to
Yeah,
consider here.
I think that's helpful. That does lay out um, more of a like an algorithmic way of like looking at it that I think is helpful for people because I feel this the same way about like, what you said the facilitator in your network told you about psilocybin. I've thought about that before a little bit differently. Somebody who's really struggling, maybe somebody just died in their family, or they just lost their job, or these things are really, really fresh. They
Yeah,
maybe just got divorced. Psilocybin can be maybe a little bit too intense for some people.
yeah,
It's right in the heat of all of that um, pain that somebody's experiencing or that what they're going through is still really fresh.
yeah.
Um,
I think with psilocybin, you want to come in with a baseline level of relative stability.
right. Yes. Yeah, that's a
Doesn't
really good
mean
way
that
to put
you're like you don't have problems or that
it.
you're
Hmm.
not, you don't have some pain that you're, emotional pain or physical pain that you're trying
Yeah.
to get through, but you don't want things to be super fresh like that because a psychedelic experience with psilocybin is inherently destabilizing itself.
Right. Yeah. And that's where the growth comes from too, is that
Yeah,
building that stability up afterwards. It's maybe a belief got questioned during the ceremony, and now rebuilding this afterwards is where the
yeah.
real growth happens. Um, and then ketamine, it seems from my studies and everything, like it's got more of a pharmaceutical antidepressant quality to it, where with psilocybin, people say, "Oh, I stopped smoking because I could see how much it was hurting my family, or I could see how much my family didn't want me to do it because I experienced all the emotion that they would have if I got cancer one day." And it's
Hmm.
this very somatic, like experiential type of
Yeah,
experience that changes the way people, like it doesn't have anything to do with their nicotine receptors, but it outperforms Chantix.
yeah.
And then ketamine, on the other hand, I think people walk away with more of an afterglow that helps them kind of take a step back from whatever um, depression or this heaviness that they were experiencing is to maybe
Hmm.
start to think a little bit more clearly.
Yeah,
Um,
I think if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying is it seems that ketamine has more of the traditional pharmacological effect, whereas
yeah,
psilocybin, it's more about like the material that comes up. It's about the experience and how they make new meaning out of that. And I think there's definitely some truth to that. I think psilocybin also has a pharmacological effect, and that's where like the neuroplasticity piece comes in. But definitely, like I am on board with the argument that people have that you can't remove the trip and retain the full therapeutic effect of psychedelics.
yeah. Do you have more thoughts on these tripless psychedelics? Because that's actually another thing I wanted to ask about BPL 001 and all these other things they're
Yeah,
coming up with, or um,
I think it's great that
deuterated
they're
form
coming
of
out.
DMT that.
I'm all in favor of more medicines that solve problems in unique ways.
Mhm.
I just think that there's inherently a compromise there. And so selecting the right use cases for those medicines is going to be a big part of the job. So, if we're talking about depression, maybe we'll see some positive effect there. I personally, I am dubious that it'll be as powerful as a tripful psychedelic.
Uh-huh.
But if you're talking about something that is not related to mood, if you're talking about something that's more neurological in nature,
Parkinson's example.
Parkinson's, like, yeah, let's do it. They don't need a trip to
Yeah.
restore nerve function.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. Um, all these different analogs that are coming out. A lot of them have been around for a long time since Sasha Shulgin had his lab and invented all these new
Hmm.
phenethylamines and tryptamines and everything. But I also see them as a good thing. I don't I and then it's also complicated with our drug approval process because to fund a clinical trial which costs $100 million,
Yeah.
there needs to be some sort of a benefit for these companies to recoup their
Yeah.
costs. And then the people that I've met and talked to and gone to the conferences and heard them talk about their companies and stuff like that, they all seem like they're good people trying to solve a problem. Um, but the thing is, running a clinical trial on something you can't patent, they're
Hmm.
never going to be able to fund that clinical trial. So it's
Yeah. They
almost
got
like
to
a
be able to
double-edged
patent something.
sword.
They need some defensibility.
Yeah. Yeah. So then that's one thing I think is going to really help like break down the stigma. So here's where my train of thoughts like going. The clinical trials on a deuterated form of DMT that lasts 2 hours that
Mhm.
is now a company can patent it and profit from it and
Yeah.
everything. We have the problem that you were talking about earlier where they could also make that the only legitimate pathway, and
Yeah.
that's a problem. But I think having this clinical trial in the first place opens people up a little bit more like culturally towards the idea
Yeah.
that psychedelics might be beneficial or helpful or not all bad. And then
100%.
that cultural change can hopefully push the policy down the road towards decriminalization. Because I think it's unproductive what the way we treat addiction in our society and everything with the way our drug policy is. And that's a whole nother topic. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's just kind of like my vision or hope for the way things maybe should go, or I hope they go.
Yeah. It's pretty clear to me that the Trump's executive order and the cascade of things that are going to come out of that, eventually culminating in multiple FDA approvals of psychedelic medicines, like that is going to create a new wave of demand that those medicines alone cannot absorb. So where's that
Hmm.
demand going to go? You know?
Right, right. It's true. While we're talking about these like different legitimate pathways, are you seeing like certain things get framed as legitimate in this space and other things get framed as like fringe or maybe with like less respect?
Hmm. Interesting. Um, could you give me an example of what you mean by that?
An example would be like the ceremonial space versus like the clinical space. I find
Yeah.
sometimes the clinical space from certain people doesn't get a lot of respect because it's like, well, you're taking these sacred molecules and you're extracting the
Hmm.
um, the molecule, and then now that could be used for profit and this sort of
Yeah.
thing. And then I don't really see it vice versa the other way.
See,
But
okay,
definitely in
yeah.
the
To me,
past,
it's like
definitely
it's really a
used
matter
it.
of perspective. It depends on who you're talking to, because I
Yeah,
do see it vice versa. I see both. I see
yeah.
people who are very entrenched in their way of seeing things, and they hang out in circles where that is the shared belief,
Hmm.
and the other side is dismissed or not even really, considered.
Yeah. Well, no, we did see it the other way around in 1993 when, or prior to RAFRA when peyote ceremonies were getting criminalized. So
Hmm.
we've definitely seen that before.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that was something I wanted to just ask about because
Yeah, I
we
mean,
talked
the
about we
obvious
talked about that a
example
lot.
of seeing it in that direction is like the healthcare industry complex. Like they're
Yeah.
not really taking ceremony very seriously right now.
Yeah, and one of the best uh, I think things for mental health is community and
Yeah.
the types of the thing about for me the ceremonial space that I find so profound that can't be replicated one on one with the therapist is the um, the the Greek word is communitas. There's a paper about this
Yeah.
in the psychedelic. I forget what journal it was in, but you could be sitting right next to a lawyer, a cop, a tow truck driver, and a single mother, and it doesn't matter who's what or what everybody's title is or where everybody came from. Everybody for that weekend is just a human being connecting with another human being, and that can be so powerful.
I
Um,
agree.
and we get to that idea of like who we are in this world on this planet and what our roles are and what our character, so to speak, is in this simulation. But
Hmm.
when when we were talking earlier about the different medicines and their different applications or the different psychedelics and their different applications,
Yeah.
um, I find San Pedro or mescaline and Bufo to be two that I think could be more beneficial for people in like high trauma professions or first
Mm.
responders or people like this because and I guess I'll tell you a little bit of like my personal stories
Yeah.
is like with being a firefighter for 15 years it's not like one bomb goes off and then all of a sudden PTSD. It's slow over the course
Like
of
accumulated.
years, cumulative,
Yeah.
and it's like when you look in the mirror, you don't realize you look different, a little bit different every day until you see a picture of yourself from 5 years ago.
Yeah.
It's like that, but with mental health. And
Yeah.
um, over time, my view of the world had just changed to like, you know, this place is dangerous.
Mm.
Um, this place is, not this city's falling apart or like there's just good people, bad things happen to good people. And my view of everything had gotten very cynical and negative
Mm.
over the years. And that's why I think one thing that people talk about after the San Pedro experience or mescaline is like
Yeah.
this like the doors of perception like he talks about in Aldous Huxley and doors of perception just looking at the folds in his trousers for an hour and how
Yeah.
beautiful and amazing it was
And
and
the legs of the chair,
right
just
and
beautiful,
yeah
just
yeah
glorious chair legs.
and it kind of think can remind somebody like that like you know what there is a lot of beauty around me
Hmm.
and that can stick with somebody. And then with 5-MeO DMT, that ego dissolution that you were talking about, one of the other things for first responders, firefighters, and cops too is this attachment to like who we are and this like idea that um there's so much and it's a good thing. There's so much like meaning that
Yeah.
in what we do and why we do it and um that keeps us coming back to work every day. But then there comes this fusion with the identity of being this
Sure.
first responder, and then people retire and experience
Mm.
depression and all kinds of things after they retire. They retire and all these PTSD symptoms start.
Yes.
Um, and then 5-MeO DMT takes that identity and just says, let's put that aside for a minute. And
Here's your real identity.
yeah, and you can just float through the cosmos that is your being, and then that'll be there for you when you come back. People come back and they're like, "Whoa,
Yeah.
that's a whole different perspective."
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. The
yeah,
fusion with the identity is difficult to defuse, to unwind. And I agree with you. I think that 5-MeO is uniquely capable of helping people do that because it's because it's so violent in the way. I
yeah,
mean, it is so powerful in the way that it takes you out of your stories instantly. Another example of a group like that is exited founders, people who have invested years of their lives in building a company and
right,
had
yeah,
to identify with it so much because that's what it takes. And then you get the exit, and then what do you do? Oh,
yeah,
I built my whole life around achieving this goal and I achieved it, and now I'm like anchorless.
yeah, exactly. I want to stop, make sure I'm being respectful of your time. Do you
I
want to
can
keep
go until the
talking?
hour.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Um, so feel like we could talk all day about this stuff, but just want to make sure I'm being
Yeah.
respectful of your time. Um, over the next few years, if you were, well, I guess I could ask over the next few years, where are you focusing your effort
Mm.
in your business?
Yeah. Right now, I'm very focused on figuring out how to make this regulated market work. That was the whole, thesis behind Althea acquiring Tricycle Day was you've built up this audience and a lot of trust, and people come to you and they see you as a resource for understanding how psychedelics work and when they're appropriate. And we're like Althea, now I'm speaking from their perspective, like we have invested a lot of energy and resource into um, helping the supply side of this regulated market. We're helping
Hmm.
them stay in compliance. We're helping them um, run their practices. But the biggest challenge is how do we make sure enough clients, participants are coming through that system that the model is successful so that it can then be replicated throughout other parts of the United States and potentially even be replicated at a federal level. So the stakes feel quite high, but I'm up for the challenge, and we're experimenting with lots of different things. And one thing in particular, you caught me at like where this is top of mind is we've come to the realization that it's not about convincing people. We don't have to persuade people to do
Hmm.
this. Like a lot of people are interested and they understand that psilocybin can change their life for the better, but it's hard to justify the cost. And there are a lot of reasons why the cost is high. I think it's very much worth the price that facilitators and centers are charging, but we have to be creative about how to bring that price down. And so that's what we've started experimenting with and we've had some good results in the past
Okay,
week or
so
two.
what have the experiments been? Have costs come down at all? I know 2 years ago when the first service centers opened up in Colorado or Oregon, there were a lot that ended up going out of business because of the
Mhm.
cost. Has that
Yeah.
gotten better? And
Yeah. Yeah, I think it
what's
has
caused
gotten
it to
better.
change?
The first way that it got better was in setting up the policies in such a way that there wasn't as much of a regulatory financial burden. So, like
Mm,
going from Oregon to Colorado, that was something that was very important to the policy writers. They're like, okay, we have to make sure this is equitable and accessible. So, they did some things there to make the supply side costs lower because ultimately that gets passed down to the consumer, right?
hmm.
That was the first wave of things that changed. And then, zooming forward to what we're doing right now, a big part of what we figured out we could do is Colorado's regulations allow for group sessions. So obviously, if you can put a group of people together and they can essentially split the cost of what's necessary to pay the facilitator and center what they need to make it work. So we're doing that. And rather than putting the onus on the center or facilitator to assemble that group, we have a large audience, so we can actually source that group and put them together and then funnel them over to a provider that has room on their calendar and wants to provide the service. So that the combination of
Mm,
those two things allows us to bring the price down considerably. And again, this experiment's very new, like literally less than a week old, but the
cool.
traction has been pretty remarkable.
Okay. Yeah. So in right now I'm doing fire prevention as my normal day job. About 2 years ago, I moved from full-time paramedic to fire prevention. I
Mm,
still work as a firefighter and paramedic about like once a week on just for overtime and stuff like that. But my regular job is fire prevention. I work in our cannabis unit. So I'm in all these cannabis grows all the time. And I hear so many things about the amount of money they have to spend just to stay afloat in the legal market.
yeah.
Um, one thing in particular in LA, they to secure a cannabis license in LA, you have to have an address where you're going to grow,
Mm,
and they wanted you to already have that property secured prior to the application. So the 12 months that you're going through this application process, you're paying
yeah.
$50,000 a
You got
month in
all the
rent.
overhead and no revenue.
Right. And there's just been so many things in cannabis like that have surprised me. Like another one, somebody transporting from like Northern California down to San Diego and wanted to sell to a business in LA,
Uh-huh.
weren't allowed to do it because they would have had to have a separate shipment,
Mm,
or there are things like this. I was
yeah.
wondering if you've heard stories like that in the psilocybin
Yeah.
supply chain too.
Yeah, there are analogous challenges to it. I mean, it is a fundamentally different market because we're not talking about consumer products.
Hmm.
There's still like in neither state can you just like spin up a like a mushroom dispensary. It's all facilitated
Hmm.
services. But even so, some of the same things still apply. Like for example, the fact that psilocybin mushrooms are a controlled substance, a Schedule 1 controlled substance, means that this the I think it's called Schedule 280E. Maybe I'm getting the numbers wrong, but there's a tax code that says that you cannot deduct any of those expenses from your business. So basically,
280E. Yeah.
280E, yeah.
Yeah.
So that applies. Another thing that applies is like the restrictions around location. That was actually one of the things
Mm.
that Colorado learned from Oregon. So Colorado made sure to include a provision that allowed facilitators to do remote preparation and integration sessions. That way, because they're drawing clients from out of state, it makes that process much more accessible. They don't have to come in for all of the prep,
Mm.
stay through the medicine administration, do all the integration before they go home. They can just come for the medicine administration part.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of things um, that I guess regulators hadn't thought about, or a lot of
Yeah.
these things that just pop up along the way.
You don't know
It's like,
until
okay, and
it's
then you
out
can,
there in the world. Yeah.
yeah, and it's important to be able to identify those
Hmm.
types of things.
Yeah.
So,
And to your point about like the cost of having the physical location, Colorado also addressed that. And what they did, which was kind of an incremental step, was if you are, let's say you're already a clinician of some kind, like you're a mental health counselor and you have an office, you do not have to get a separate brick and mortar to do your psilocybin facilitation business. And that was
mm,
the case in Oregon. So, that you don't have to suddenly take on a whole new rent. You still need to get
yeah.
that center licensed. There are slightly eased restrictions there, but the next step in that incremental process would be to say, actually, you don't even need to get the physical location licensed for this to work. The facilitator needs to be licensed and the center needs to be under code, but you don't have to pay all the licensing fees and go through the whole rigmarole to get it licensed. But we haven't gotten there yet.
Okay, cool. Which which states are next, do you think?
Well, New Mexico is definitely
Mm.
next because they passed their program, but they're still rolling it out. They said that they were aiming to get it live before the end of this year, so they're next for sure. And then, I mean, frankly, even for me, someone who's tracking this stuff constantly, it's hard to keep track of which states are legitimate contenders for rolling out a
Yeah.
program next because there's so many false starts. Like something will make it through the House and then not pass in the Senate, or they'll get all the way to the governor and then it runs out of time. Minnesota came really close recently,
Hmm.
passed through the legislature. It was going to be a similar, psilocybin facilitated services model, and they just ran out of time before the governor could sign it. New York is in a similar situation. They have a different model though. They actually have, it's interesting. It's like almost like a driver's license for being able to use psilocybin mushrooms.
Huh.
So it would still be regulated manufacturers and like you can't just buy it from anyone at a store. But if you go through like a state sponsored and approved course as a consumer, you get a license to be able to go procure mushrooms from someone who's licensed to sell them. So that
Hmm.
would be a new model. Pretty interesting.
Yeah, that would be new. That would be new. Has LSD come into the picture at all in any of these policies, or
Yeah,
it's still too much?
people have this kind of knee-jerk reaction to synthetic versus natural. I think
Mhm.
it's been a lot easier to get natural medicine, buy-in through
Mhm.
various, policymakers and the people who need to be won over. So LSD has been kind of cut out of the picture in most cases. Like all the ones that favor natural medicines will say psilocybin producing mushrooms, plants that produce DMT, even iboga, like is sometimes included, which is kind of interesting, right? Because iboga is definitely carries a lot more physiological risk than say LSD, which is
Mhm.
a classic psychedelic. I mean, it's pretty much like psilocybin. So it does speak to that, dissonance, and sometimes people get caught up in this natural versus synthetic thing, which I kind of disagree with, if you can't tell.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree with you on natural versus synthetic. I mean, there's been so many benefits from synthetic
Yeah.
psychedelics as well that it is just like yeah, people hear like synthetic and
Yeah.
it comes with a lot of this like, whoa, it's chemical type of thing.
Yeah. Where LSD does have a path forward is in the FDA approved medicine. Definium Therapeutics is progressing an LSD formulation through
Hmm.
clinical trials, starting with generalized anxiety disorder and following behind that with a major depression indication. So, yeah, and they're pretty far along. They're in phase
And
three.
for anybody that's listening to this that's in LA, they're running clinical trials in LA on that
There you
and
go.
LSD for anxiety, and um, there's another clinical trial in DMT. On DMT, there's a place in Santa Monica and West Hollywood that they're doing these sessions for those clinical trials. I don't know if it's the same company that you're talking about, but it is
The
a
only,
DMT and an
I'm pretty sure
LSD.
the only company that is in, yeah, in clinical trials for LSD is Definium. They used to be called
What about
MindMed,
Mind? Oh,
rebrand.
okay. I was gonna say MindMed. I think it's
Yeah,
MindMed.
same company,
Yeah.
same
Okay.
company.
Yeah.
Yeah, MM120
Yeah.
is their drug. But DMT, that could be Helus, which used to be called Cybin. That's the deuterated DMT that you mentioned earlier.
Hmm.
Is that the clinical
Yeah.
trial you're talking about?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about or add?
I mean, it's up to you. Yeah. Feel like we
Yeah.
covered a lot of ground though.
Yeah. Definitely. We talked about a lot of the advocacy stuff that I wanted to talk about, like how to talk to people about this and how to share information. Because I I think this is where I feel like my kind of home is in the psychedelic movement is like sharing the information because I'm a first responder. Like I have a job. I can't be a facilitator. I can't go down
Mhm,
that road.
mhm,
Um, I could maybe be a therapist or something, get a therapy degree or things of that nature.
mhm.
However, I think I'm just in a position to like talk to people about this and put this stuff out there. Um, so that's yeah, what I really want to talk about was
Yeah.
advocacy and how we talk to people.
Well, maybe
Um,
next time California is pushing that bill through, you can get into the assembly and give your
yeah,
testimony. That would be cool.
yeah, I don't think they have anything active right now,
Not
do
right
they?
now, but they've had a lot of shots on goal over the years.
Yeah, yeah. Let me look through these questions real quick and see if I had anything else. Um, where can people find you? What's your
TricycleDay.com.
bicycleday.com?
Yeah,
Cool.
easy.
That's awesome. And where are you located again?
I live in Austin, Texas.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we'll have to keep in touch.
All
Yeah,
right.
and
Yeah, it's a pleasure talking to you.
appreciate.
I hope this is helpful. I hope it fulfills your requirement for your course.
Yeah, I think it does, and I think there's a lot of good stuff in here that if you're comfortable with me sharing beyond the course,
Yeah.
that'd be awesome too. And I think it
Yeah, I'm
could
fine with that.
be helpful. Yeah, awesome.
All right.
All right. Thanks,
Have a
Henry.
nice rest of the night.
You too. Bye.
Yeah.